My name is Ashley, and I'm 27 years old. I was an only child raised by a calm and doting father and a lively, energetic mother. Their marriage was harmonious and joyful, even if Mom could be a bit too spirited at times. In fact, I got married wanting the kind of marriage life they led. Judson is my husband, who I met through a friend. Both my family and Judson's are in the food industry, but his family owns a popular French restaurant. They've achieved great success, operating several outlets in and around New York City. As the heir to the family business, Judson was involved in its operations. While we were dating, his anecdotes about the restaurant and his ambitions were entertaining. However, after marriage, I started to feel a twinge of annoyance whenever my family's business was compared to his. Running a famous restaurant is tough, unlike your family's business, which seems like it's about to go under. Arguing back was exhausting. My family's restaurant was not on the brink of closure, and if I may say so, it was not Judson who was sustaining his family's business. It was Todd. Todd was Judson's cousin from his mother's side. Orphaned as a child, he was taken in by Judson's family. Judson initially referred to Todd as a brother, but in reality, he treated him like a slave. The reason Judson's family business didn't fail was thanks to Todd's competence and his mother. Observing their family business as a daughter-in-law, it was clear that my father-in-law and Judson were simply arrogant. Without Todd and my mother-in-law, Judson's family business would undoubtedly go bankrupt. Their attitudes towards Todd and my mother-in-law, who were the ones contributing, were arrogant. Judson's logic was that since he had saved Todd from being an orphan, it was only natural that Todd should repay the favor. According to my father-in-law, since my mother-in-law was his wife, it was natural for her to serve him. In other words, they were both just pawns to them. Unlike the haughty father-in-law and Judson, my mother-in-law and Todd were kind. After graduating from college at 24, Todd took on a secretary-like role to Judson. My mother-in-law spoke to me, her face filled with sorrow. Todd would have been happier if he had been taken in by other relatives. My husband forcibly adopted him because Todd seemed useful to him. The kind-hearted mother-in-law was worried about Todd. However, she was frustrated that she couldn't openly defend him in front of her husband and Judson. Despite being the heir, Judson was incompetent. That's why he found Todd's competence irritating and was harsh towards him. He often complained about the employees and Todd to me. The employees only follow Todd's instructions. Well, if things go well when Todd gets involved, I think that's fine. The employees know what they need for themselves too. They show reluctance to follow Judson's orders because they have complaints against him. Todd was struggling to make the employees accept Judson's unreasonable instructions. In fact, Todd and my mother-in-law rarely voiced their opinions. They obediently followed the orders of my father-in-law and Judson. But behind the scenes, they were reworking the foolish strategies of my father-in-law and Judson into appropriate instructions. They were desperately making sure the business didn't fail while saving face for my father-in-law and Judson. That's why the employees respected Todd and my mother-in-law. Since getting married, I've observed Judson, my in-laws, and Todd and came to a realization. My mother-in-law and Todd were wise and competent. They knew that insisting on their way would cause chaos around them. They were gaining the trust of the employees while preserving the dignity of my father-in-law and Judson. On the contrary, my father-in-law and Judson were ignorant and incompetent. They didn't realize that their positions were secured only thanks to the competent people around them. If they were a little smarter, they would cherish my mother-in-law and Todd. They believed they were more competent than anyone else because they were at the top. They looked down on those around them because they overestimated their own abilities. I once told my parents about this when I visited my hometown. My mother sat drinking her loaded potato soup. "Ashley, just get a divorce and come home." My father gave a bitter smile at my mother's active encouragement of my divorce. It was too soon to talk about divorce as we hadn't even been married for half a year. I was disappointed in Judson and my father-in-law, but my mother-in-law and Todd were good people. I can't just easily get a divorce, I thought, giving a bitter smile. My dad gave a gentle nod, but my mom, sipping her second bowl of pizza soup, suggested, Well, why don't you get a divorce, marry Todd, and come help us out at our pizza shop? Mom, don't say such weird things, I protested heatedly, to which my dad kindly asked, Ashley, are you troubled about something? I sighed at my dad's question. He's gentle but sharp. I gave up and began talking about my issues with Judson. Judson is really a handful. Judson looks down on me, seeing me as just a daughter of a shabby pizza shop owner. That alone is irritating, but there were more problems. Just because I talk with Todd, he suspects me of cheating. Neither Todd nor I have such feelings. Todd is basically a brother-in-law to me. When I discussed it with my mother-in-law, she gave a deep sigh. According to my mother-in-law, there's a female employee Judson was interested in the past. However, that woman admired and liked Todd. Judson, angered, came up with a random excuse and fired her. It may sound rude to you, Ashley, but Judson hates losing to Todd. It was not jealousy, but a distorted sense of competition. Therefore, Todd knows to keep his conversations with me to a minimum. I'm fed up with Judson's selfishness, but Todd, who works closely with me, must be even more exhausted. When I talked about Judson's troublesome personality, my mother made a dumbfounded face. What a petty man. He's too insecure. Don't you think so, honey? Yes, indeed. Talking with my mom and dad like this seemed to dissipate my gloomy mood. My mom has been spirited since she was a child, and my late grandfather had difficulty finding a suitable match for her. She was beautiful and a popular girl in town, but she was too energetic. Since she was the eldest daughter, her family needed a son-in-law to succeed her family business. The men my grandfather introduced to her shrank back from her overly energetic demeanor. My grandfather thought a gentle man would be suitable for his active daughter, and so the arrow pointed to my father. He was the son of my grandfather's close friend, well known for his gentleness and intelligence. When they had their first meeting, it was my mom who fell for my dad. According to my mom, my dad looked like a handsome actor when he was young. Even now, he's known as a refined man by the customers of our pizza shop. My dad, attracted to my mom's lively personality, decided to marry her. As my parents chatted amiably, I remembered an important matter. Can I bring Judson, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and Todd here next time? It was the first time for my in-laws and Todd to visit my parents' home. My mother-in-law wanted to greet my parents again, which is why she asked. My father-in-law and Judson reluctantly agreed. Surprisingly, Todd, interested in making pizza, volunteered to come. My guess is that Todd was concerned that my father-in-law and Judson might behave rudely. My parents were pleased to grant my request. Of course, we'll make them realize how delicious our pizza is. Mom, you're getting too excited. That's how I ended up bringing my in-laws to my parents' pizza shop. I hadn't expected a battleground to lie ahead. Well, actually, I had a nagging feeling something unpleasant was coming. Todd usually steps in when my mother-in-law can't control my father-in-law and Judson. It was certain that a storm was brewing. And then, the day came when we all visited my parents' pizza shop. The moment Judson saw my family's pizza shop, he sneered. Still as old-fashioned as ever. It was fortunate that my mother wasn't present in that moment. If she had heard him, Judson would have been banned from our shop right there. As I ignored him and went into the shop, my mom was waiting cheerfully. Welcome, everyone. Long time no see, Judson. Ashley told me a lot about you. She didn't mean it in a good way, though, but I guess Judson didn't get her sarcasm. I don't know what Judson misunderstood, but he looked very flattered. My in-laws didn't get it, but it seemed that Todd did. He was smiling as if he understood the hidden meaning in my mom's words. It was rare for Todd to show his emotions. After my mother had greeted Judson and my in-laws, she turned to Todd. You're Todd, right? So tall and handsome, you look like a model. Overwhelmed by my mother's forcefulness, Todd showed a puzzled smile. Thank you. I'm looking forward to today. He shook her hand politely and headed towards the room where Todd and my in-laws were. My father was in the process of making pizza. When my mother tried to bring out some drinks and our popular side dishes, my father-in-law scoffed. Both the store and your mother are old and dirty. I was both angry and chilled. As I looked, my mom was preparing drinks right in front of me. To be honest, I was too terrified to look directly at my mother's face. As I swallowed my fear, I heard a menacing voice. "Say that again?" My normally cheerful mother's voice, laden with quiet anger, was terrifying. Even though my mother-in-law and Todd tried to stop him, my father-in-law spoke again. "Both the store and the old woman running this place are filthy. I think I'm going to get food poisoning." My father-in-law's outrageous words were met with Judson's smirking agreement. My furious mother quietly put away the prepared drinks and brought out a 1-liter bottle of wine. She then sharply said to my father-in-law, "Hey, if you don't want your head split open like a watermelon, get out." My father-in-law was taken aback by her forcefulness, but managed to get out a parting shot. Just like the daughter, the mother is also ugly." As my mother started to swing the 1-liter bottle, my father rushed to stop her. My father tried to defuse the situation with a smile, but it was too late. My father-in-law and Judson spat at the entrance of the shop and left. My mom tried to chase after them, but my father and I desperately held her back. "How dare you call me an old woman? Call me miss!" "Mom, that's not what you're supposed to be angry about." Well, everything he said did piss me off, too. As my father and I desperately tried to calm her down, my mom finally calmed down a bit. My mother-in-law and Todd were profusely apologetic, but these two didn't need to apologize. The problem was my father-in-law's and Judson's condescending attitudes. The whole incident was caused by my father-in-law's derogatory comments about my family's home and Judson's amusement at them. I, too, was seething with anger over the heartless insults. My mother-in-law, noticing my state, spoke to me. "Ashley, I'm really sorry. My husband and Judson, they won't change. You can consider divorce for your own sake." Todd seemed to agree and added his own opinion quietly. "Sis, these incidents will continue. It would be best if you distance yourself." Seeing the regretful expressions on my mother-in-law and Todd's faces, I was conflicted. I could divorce, but I felt sorry for my mother-in-law and Todd. While my father and I were at a loss, my mother spoke up bluntly. "You two don't seem happy, especially Todd. You can leave whenever you want, right?" When my mother asked why he allowed himself to be used by a man like Judson, Todd looked at my mother-in-law. "I'm concerned about my aunt. I can't leave her after everything she's done for me." He felt no gratitude towards my father-in-law and Judson, but Todd was considerate of my mother-in-law. Additionally, he worried that if he left, the remaining employees would suffer due to the selfishness of my father-in-law and Judson. His concern for my mother-in-law and sense of responsibility were what held him back. Hearing Todd's true feelings, my mother-in-law began to cry. She felt guilty that Todd couldn't live freely because of her. As my father and I exchanged confused glances, not knowing what to do, my mother tapped Todd and my mother-in-law's shoulders. "Ha, that's easy. Leave it to me." My mother-in-law and Todd were taken aback by my mother's cheerful laughter. My father seemed to sense what my mother was going to do. I made up my mind too. After discussing what to do in the future, I returned home where Judson was waiting. The first thing I said to Judson was, "I'm cutting ties with your family." I declared our separation, unable to forgive my father-in-law's thoughtless words. Judson laughed scornfully, looking neither hurt nor bothered. He was a man incapable of contemplating an apology. "Huh, all right then, let's divorce." He insulted my family's pizza shop and seemed keen on divorce. I shoved the divorce papers I had prepared beforehand at him, and I gave him my final warning. "No matter what happens, don't come crying to me after our divorce." Judson, who didn't seem to understand the meaning, was nonchalant. "I'll pay you alimony, you poor pizza shop girl." I didn't need it, but I nodded so as not to arouse suspicion. And so just half a year later, Judson and I divorced. Excluding the presence of my mother-in-law and Todd, 80% of my life was stress. And with my father-in-law's thoughtless words, it became 100%. After the divorce, I returned to my parents' home. About a month later, my ex-father-in-law and ex-husband Judson came to me, pale-faced. "My wife and Todd are gone. They left divorce papers and a letter saying they were cutting ties with us." I told my ashen-faced ex-father-in-law. "How unfortunate. It's a late-life divorce, isn't it?" As I laughed, Judson, even more pale-faced, spoke up.
Employees who admired Todd quit. I got betrayed by my brother."
As I was astounded by his selfish remarks, a chilly voice rang out.
"Don't call me your brother only when it's convenient for you. I never considered you my brother."
Suddenly, Todd appeared, causing my ex-father-in-law and Judson to be utterly shocked. Then from the back, my former mother-in-law quietly emerged. While my ex-father-in-law and Judson were dumbfounded, my mother made a gallant appearance.
"These two have been scouted by us, and also we've taken over your French restaurant."
My ex-father-in-law broke out in cold sweat at my mother's declaration. My father, observing the situation, modestly smiled.
"It's nothing like that. Running a pizza shop was merely my hobby. My wife's family owns a group of restaurants, and they were kind enough to accept me as their son-in-law."
When he revealed the name of the company, my ex-father-in-law and Judson lost their footing, as they should have. Their restaurants were no match for the size of our company. There was a reason they had been running a pizza shop instead of being involved in the family business. A few years ago, my father had collapsed from overworking. Doctors suggested he should do something he enjoyed for his recovery. That's why my mother and I reopened this pizza shop my late grandfather used to run as a hobby. In other words, they just went undercover by running a pizza shop. During my parents' absence, their dedicated and skilled employees were running the company. My parents were actually overseeing their work while running the pizza shop. This was only possible because my parents were greatly admired by their staff. Under my mother's direction, our company took over the restaurant run by my ex-father-in-law and Judson. While they were complacent, the situation had changed. To the stunned ex-father-in-law and Judson, my father calmly said,
"Based on what I've seen, I've judged that you both lack the abilities to manage a business. The employees have also voiced their concerns with your management skills, so we demand your resignation."
Standing next to my father, who was gently issuing a terrifying announcement, my mother firmly said,
"We're leaving the management of the French restaurant to Todd. Todd, you can do whatever you want with these two. Stew them, roast them, crush them, you name it."
Ex-father-in-law Judson protested.
"You can't do that without our approval."
But it was futile. This was not just my parents' decision, but the will of all the employees who were upset with their boss, my ex-father-in-law and Judson. My ex-mother-in-law would now be in a supporting role for Todd, her nephew. In other words, Todd and my ex-mother-in-law now had the right to fire my ex-father-in-law and Judson. Todd exchanged glances with ex-mother-in-law and calmly said,
"I owe you for taking me in when I was a child."
My ex-father-in-law Judson had a moment of hope at Todd's kind smile, but it was fleeting. Todd changed his expression with an icy voice declared,
"But I have a grudge 100 billion times greater than that. For Judson, it's 500 billion times greater."
In short, he would neither forgive nor be merciful. Todd declared that he was stripping my ex-father-in-law Judson of all their managerial authority. Then, my ex-mother-in-law said something even more horrifying.
"I'd rather you vanish from my sight, but I'll keep you on as low-level workers."
Watching this spectacle, I felt a deep realization. People like my mother, who readily express their emotions, are actually much more predictable. Of course, my mother has her limits, but knowing when she'll act on her anger helps me stay mentally prepared. The most frightening are people like my ex-mother-in-law and Todd, who take on a lot of crap until it reaches their limit and goes off. The fact that they can bear insensitive words and deeds is proof of their strong core and kindness. My short-sighted ex-father-in-law and Judson had underestimated these two, and the situation had turned for the worst. It wasn't just the divorce with me, they had lost valuable human resources. Foolish people take for granted that kind people will forgive whatever they do. As a result, those who've reached their limit of patience have revolted, deemed unfit as managers, being turned away even by their close relatives. My ex-father-in-law and Judson were ousted. Working under Todd was humiliating for Judson, and he started crying. My ex-father-in-law yelled at Todd, calling him ungrateful, but it was too late. Although Todd holds a debt to gratitude, he harbors a grudge 100 billion times greater. Watching my ex-father-in-law Judson slink away in retreat, I said, "The mouth is indeed the gate of the evil." At my words, my father smiled.
"Angering your mother was the end of their luck."
As I observed my softly smiling father, I thought, it was him who went off, though. My father is a devoted husband to my mother, a man who would not hesitate to bring ruin upon those who dared to insult his beloved wife, all with a smile on his face. Afterward, my ex-father-in-law Judson disappeared, having received some severance pay. It must have been humiliating for them to work under my ex-mother-in-law and Todd's surveillance. Although they should have quit, they used their severance pay to start a new business, which ultimately failed. The French restaurant was actually expanded by my ex-father-in-law's parents. My ex-father-in-law never had the skills to expand his business. Now, my ex-mother-in-law and Todd are managing the French restaurant entrusted to them. They were excellent managers who gained the trust of their employees. Todd, always quiet, had gradually become more comfortable with expressing his emotions. After telling my parents that I wanted to enjoy working in the pizza restaurant for a bit longer, I continued to work in the food service industry, something I've done since before I was married. I worked together with my colleagues who I had known for some time. One day, on my day off, I went to my parents' pizza restaurant and saw my ex-mother-in-law there. She seemed to be consulting with my mother about something. I asked if anything had happened to my father, to which they informed me,
Todd is about to turn 25. He's upset about being so focused on work and not having a girlfriend.
You shouldn't have to worry about that. I sighed, but then heard my mother's lively voice. There are countless girls who would want to marry a handsome and good man like Todd. I realized, then, that my mother was enthusiastic about introducing him to potential marriage prospects. But Todd might already have someone in mind. I was worried that they were being too forceful by arranging a meeting without asking him first. When I appealed to my father about it, he just smiled. Then I heard my mother calling me. Looking at my face, she smirked. You've been listening to our conversation, right? Yes, I was, but Mom, you can't just set up a marriage meeting without asking Todd first. When I desperately objected, both my ex-mother-in-law and my mother laughed together. Feeling perplexed and unsure about what was happening, my ex-mother-in-law told me, We know who Todd likes, but he just can't seem to say it himself. Then my mother continued, Todd said he likes you, Ashley, but because you're like his sister-in-law, he feels hesitant. I was shocked because I hadn't noticed Todd's feelings. He's the type to keep things to himself, so much that I was completely unaware. Even though I thought he was a wonderful man, I didn't immediately feel any romantic feelings for him. When I shared my feelings honestly with my mother and my ex-mother-in-law, my father chimed in.
It's okay. Todd said he'd take his time and gradually make you fall for him.
Dad, I wish you kept that to yourself. At my outburst, both my mother and my ex-mother-in-law burst into laughter. And so, that's how I came to know that Todd was quietly nursing a one-sided love for me. I knew it would take forever for Todd to confess his feelings for me, so I asked him out first. Looking back, it was a clever strategy on Todd's part. Although we started off as a couple, I later asked him when he had started developing romantic feelings for me. At my question, Todd just smiled enigmatically. He never answered my question, but after 2 years of dating, we got married. In hindsight, my calm father and thoughtful Todd were quite similar. Only later did I laugh at the realization that my mom and I had similar tastes when it came to men.
My name is Emily, and I'm 29 years old. I've been married to my husband for 2 years, and I've recently become a full-time homemaker after experiencing childbirth for the first time. Despite the struggles I faced due to postpartum, the cuteness of my angelic son makes all my fatigue vanish. I can't help but gush. He has pure, adorable eyes. I bet he'll grow up to be a handsome boy. I'm already head over heels as a proud mother. However, despite my happiness, I have a problem. It's the presence of my mother-in-law, who visits us almost daily. My in-laws live about a 30-minute walk away. My mother-in-law started coming over to support me postpartum as a substitute for my busy husband and my parents who live far away. Although her help would normally be appreciated, she does little to actually assist me. Instead, she just lounges on the sofa, watching her Korean soap opera DVDs that she brings along. She's more of a burden than a help, expecting me to serve her tea and fetch her tissues. She was the one who offered to help, but what is she here for exactly? I have tried telling her, "I'm fine, you can go home," but I ended up getting an earful from my husband later that night. Undoubtedly, my mother-in-law complained to him about being sent away. Even though I asked him to stop because our son was crying, my husband still snapped at me. He's a real mama's boy. I wish I could go back in time and punch my past self for not noticing this before we got married. He insists that I replicate his mother's recipes and even tries to make me dress more like her. No matter what I say, my husband worships his mother as if she's a goddess. However, I continued to discuss the matter with my husband. "We don't need to rely on your mom. It would help so much if you could just help me out a little." "What? I work all day and I'm exhausted. Besides, I bet the baby is happier when you take care of him." Even when I'm talking to him, his eyes are always glued to the TV or his phone, showing no sign of being engaged in the conversation. Does he not care about our son? I'm just as exhausted as he is. With my eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, fatigue, and stress, I glare at him. "Don't you dare complain to my dad. He's also busy and won't tolerate any unnecessary drama." For a moment, he turned his gaze to me, and my husband spoke as if to warn me. My father-in-law is nearing retirement, but still works a lot. I know he is busy. However, it would be a great comfort if he, who treats me like his daughter, could say something to my husband or mother-in-law. As I recall my conversations with my husband, my mother-in-law's inconsiderate voice snaps me back to reality. "Emily, the baby is fussing. Hurry up and soothe him down. It's the fun part of the drama now," she calls, not taking her eyes off of the TV screen. I stop folding the laundry to attend to my son. As I pass the back of my engrossed mother-in-law, I stick my tongue out at her in my mind. Being worn out from children and sleep deprivation, her presence, doing nothing but hanging around, has become a major source of stress for me. However, it has nothing to do with my son. If my husband is not willing to help, then I am the only one left for my son. "Well, I should get going," she finally says when the clock strikes 5. She quickly gets up from the sofa, uses my dressing table as if it's her own, fixes her makeup perfectly, and goes out into the twilight city. Apparently, she is taking dance classes for her health and to maintain her beauty. From the time we met to discuss our wedding, she would brag, saying, "I used to be a model, so it's a habit for me to stay presentable. Thanks to that, people always think I'm younger than I actually am. It's a pain." She is 58, but admittedly, she does look younger than her age. That being said, if she's going to classes this late, she should just go during the day, instead of wasting time at my house. "Grandma doesn't do anything, does she?" As I spoke to my son in my arms, he was soundly asleep, gently breathing. An hour later, the doorbell rang. It was my father-in-law. Having been thoroughly tired of my mother-in-law's behavior for days on end, I ignored my husband's advice and had been secretly discussing the matter with my father-in-law over the phone. My father-in-law wanted to see his grandson's face, so he had made time out of his busy schedule to come and visit us. Looking at my sleeping son, my father-in-law, whose expression was softer than my husband's, chuckled. "He is so adorable." "So, she left in the evening today for her dance class without helping out the house again today?" My father-in-law sighed as he looked around the mess in my house. Guessing from his response, it seemed he just found out about his wife attending dance classes. Seeing the state of my house, he must have realized that his wife really hadn't been helping out at all. My father-in-law bowed his head and apologized to me. "It's not your fault," I rushed to say, but he shook his head. "My wife herself said she would support you, Emily, but I'll see to it that she doesn't come here from tomorrow. And I understand my son may not be much of a help, but if there's anything you need, let me know anytime." "Thank you so much," I responded gratefully. It seemed that my father-in-law was also worried about my husband's lack of interest in housework and childcare. For the first time in a long time, I felt the touch of kindness, and it brought tears to my eyes. About 3 months have passed since my father-in-law started visiting us. Thanks to him, my mother-in-law had stopped coming to our house. My mood has been brighter ever since. I never knew I could feel this relieved just by her not coming. My son has even been able to hold up his hand now, and I've been able to spare a little more time for housework. Oh, it's a mess again. I sighed as I spotted the state of my half-open husband's room. Dirty shirts and socks were scattered all over the floor. I threw them in the laundry basket and decided to sweep the floor while I was at it. As I shoved the cleaning tool under the bed, I felt something was off. Did I hit something? As I maneuvered the cleaning tool, a clear file slid out with the bank book inside. "Gosh, he's such a slob," I muttered. I picked up the bank book and set it on my husband's desk, and suddenly my breath hitched. I realized it was not my husband's bank book, but the one we'd set up for our son. Why was our son's bank book in my husband's room when I always kept it somewhere else? Currently, the only money in the account was the generous amount gifted from my parents and my father-in-law for the birth of our son. It was a considerable amount saved for our son's future. A sense of dread crept over me as I tentatively opened the bank book. All the money in it was withdrawn. Out of impulse, I opened my husband's desk drawer and pulled out his bank book. Even though I knew I shouldn't, I couldn't stop myself. "Just as I thought," I muttered. Opening my husband's bank book, I found that the entire bonus he'd just received was withdrawn. Moreover, the remaining balance was too low. My mind went blank. Even as I heard my son crying in distance, I was too stunned to rush to him as I usually would. A few hours later, when my husband came back from work, I confronted him. He was initially angry that I had entered his room and looked through his things, but eventually confessed.
I was financially helping my mother.
What? Why would you need to support your mother? And I can't believe you do something like this without telling me. You even dipped into our child's savings. This is not okay. My husband angrily thumped his desk as I confronted him.
Look, I only help out because my mom said she was struggling, okay? She's probably got problems we know nothing about. Besides, it's my hard-earned money. If you have so many complaints, maybe we should just get a divorce,
he grumbled. Our son, who had been gently snoring in his crib, woke up and started crying. My husband argued with me and disturbed our son's sleep. I hurried over to him and lifted him up in my arms. The money you earned? The money in the account was a generous gift from our parents for our son. You can't claim it. Both your dad and my parents gifted us thinking about our son's future. Don't you feel guilty at all? And I'd appreciate if you would stop mentioning divorce so thoughtlessly, I retorted, watching our son, now cradled in my arms and calming down from his tears. My husband snorted with a look of annoyance. Then he presented a sheet of paper on the desk. It was a divorce paper, and his section was already filled out. I was shocked, and my eyes widened in surprise.
I wouldn't mind getting a divorce anytime, to be honest. But you wouldn't want to be struggling financially, burdened with a newborn baby,
he said, seemingly thinking this would shut me up. My feelings started to recede at my husband's childish behavior. That's when I realized something. He had never once held our son. Seeing me silent, my husband laughed, almost as if he was certain of his upper hand.
So from now on, please pay the living expenses from your own pocket,
he added nonchalantly, tapping my shoulder before leaving the room. As the living room door closed, I sank to the floor, exhausted. Tears naturally flowed down my cheeks. My son, nestled in my arms, stretched out his little hand to me and giggled innocently. I had made up my mind. The next day I submitted the paper he'd handed me to the city hall. Afterwards, I got on an Amtrak train. I left a note saying, "I'll submit the divorce papers and will be claiming alimony and reimbursement for the money you used, along with my wedding ring." I was concerned about taking our newborn baby outside, but he seemed intrigued by the new surroundings and was fortunately in a good mood. I braced myself to take extra care of his health. I was headed to my parents' house in Michigan. I only brought essentials for our son and had a few of my valuables, so I didn't have much luggage. My parents, having been informed the previous night, were ready to welcome us. After hearing my husband and his mother's actions, they were enraged, but they smiled kindly and suggested that I help them with their family business and raise my son here. My parents ran a fruit farm. It was a tough job, but I had helped out since I was a kid and had some experience and knowledge. I began to think that it might not be so bad. The next day, while I was enjoying a rare moment of relaxation, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. Reluctantly, I answered the call. "Emily, what the hell is this about?" The moment I put the phone to my ear, a shrill scream pierced through. Somewhat irked, I replied, "Who are you?" "Huh?" Taken aback by my nonchalant response, my mother-in-law stuttered. Feigning recollection, I exaggeratedly said, "Oh, is it you, mother-in-law? I'd completely forgotten about you since I've already divorced your son." My somewhat light-hearted reply seemed to shake her.
Emily, do you realize what you have done? Acting so selfishly.
I assumed my husband had to run to her, not expecting me to really go through with the divorce. It made sense that she was panicked enough to call. Selfish? I think the problem lies with your son, who presented me with the signed divorce agreement as a threat. Though it worked out just fine for me, I responded calmly. She didn't seem to understand.
I'll forgive you for this. Get married to my son. He's so upset, he's crying right now.
I wondered if he was still by her side. The image of my husband watching me talk on the phone with my mother-in-law, tears welling up in his eyes, sent a chill down my spine. At the same time, I was utterly speechless at his determination to somehow get his mother to intervene. Enough is enough. I don't need a mama's boy for a husband, or a mother-in-law who spends her night in male strip clubs.
Huh?
My mother-in-law choked on her words from the other end of the phone.
How do you know that?
It was clear she reacted to the mention of the gentleman's club. This happened last night. After my husband left the living room, I pulled out my phone. One call was to my parents to tell them I planned on divorce and coming home. The other was to my father-in-law, to whom I owe gratitude and an apology, to explain the situation. That's when my father-in-law revealed everything to me. The reason mother-in-law had been practically living at our house was to visit a male strip club that opened at 6 p.m. There were various reasons she stayed at our place during the day, the first being our house was closer to the club than hers. Plus, by spending her days at our house, she could avoid chores at her own place. She also used me and our son as excuses to get back late. All this worked in my mother-in-law's favor. Apparently, she had taken quite a fancy to one of the dancers at the club and had been spending a lot on him. It was hard to believe that my mother-in-law, who had always been a homemaker, had any money of her own. And she couldn't even drink alcohol because of her low intolerance. She had been withdrawing money from the bank account my father-in-law maintained, buying drinks for the dancers, while sipping sodas herself. My father-in-law had been suspicious of my mother-in-law after I asked about her. Despite being forbidden from coming to our house, my mother-in-law continued to find reasons to go out for a while. Realizing something was off, he followed her and discovered she had been a regular at a strip club. He was deeply shocked to find out about her escapades and the misses of his bank account. To think she'd even take money from her son and grandson. If only I'd found out sooner. I am deeply sorry, Emily, and to my grandson as well. The gravity of my father-in-law's guilt and apologies over the phone, having learned about our situation, was overwhelming. You lied to my husband for money because she didn't have enough to lavish on those entertainers, didn't you? My mother-in-law remained silent at my accusation. I could hear her husband's voice over the phone saying, "Mom, tell me that is all a lie." It seemed he had been listening after all. After a moment of silence, my mother-in-law erupted in anger.
Don't use such vulgar words like lavish. I'm just showing Chris my affection. He loves it when I visit him.
Chris must be her favorite dancer's name. I sighed at my mother-in-law's pathetic outburst. The thought of my son's money being spent on her entertainment boiled my blood again. Neither my father-in-law nor I will let this slide. You better be ready, ma'am. I ended the call and switched off my phone. A few days later, I received a call from my husband who made a sincere apology about the misuse of money and his mother's actions. Regarding the divorce papers, he admitted that it was only on his mother's insistence, saying, "If she bothers you, just show her the divorce papers. She'll stop bothering you." And he wasn't serious about it. He was deeply regretful about being fooled by his mother, who he trusted unconditionally, and eventually driving us to divorce. He seemed to have finally woken up. "I'm truly sorry. I've transferred $20,000 into your account as a token of my remorse, including the misused money and for the inconveniences caused. I hope this shows my sincerity. Let's start over and create a happy family. I need you, Emily, just as much as you need me." His words made my skin crawl. Reconciliation is not an option. I only need my son. From now on, I'll need child support. We can discuss this further with our lawyers. I knew that the $20,000 was the money my father-in-law had lent my husband. It was the money saved for his retirement, separate from the account my mother-in-law had been spending from. From now on, my husband would have to work hard to repay his father and provide child support for our son. He'd also be under his father's surveillance. My husband, who believed I would be forgiving him, was in tears and apologizing. But it was too late. I said goodbye and ended the call and promptly blocked his contact. 2 months have passed since the discussion with my husband, facilitated by our lawyers, was completed. Right now, I'm assisting at my parents' orchard, while also dedicating myself to child rearing. After my divorce from my husband, I've continued to keep in touch with my father-in-law. Sometimes he comes over to see my son. Through conversations with my father-in-law, I learned that my mother-in-law had secretly accrued debt. My father-in-law, who had secretly been preparing for divorce, showed no mercy and kicked my mother-in-law out. Now it seems my ex-husband reluctantly took in his mother, and they're living together. Both my ex-husband and his mother are forced to work to repay the debts and are living under extreme poverty. As I look into my son's innocent eyes, I'm determined to raise him so he doesn't end up like his father or my mother-in-law.